Web Accessibility Initiative, and they make a group of guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. WCAG, I guess, if you want to try and pronounce it. It does not feel great. At a glance, these guidelines just state that a website should have 4 things, which they are: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So some examples of what that means is the text on a website should be readable. So you should have a good contrast for your text. If you put like yellow on top of orange, no one can read that. It is not accessible. If you have a very small font, again, this is not readable. So accessibility kind of states these basic standards. All the functionality of your website should be available for a keyboard, which is very helpful. The content that you have on your website should be very predictable to get to. So if you click the cart icon, you should not get to the search results page. Not only is this a wildly bad user experience, it's also not accessible. It's not helpful at all. If there is images or video on your page, it should have text alternatives or other methods of describing what that content is. And then also, if there are current browsers, they should be compatible with your website. So stay up to date. It is part of accessibility. Accessibility is also occasionally referred to as A11Y. I've heard it pronounced as alley, which also feels weird. It took me a really long time to figure this out, but it's actually because the 11 letters between A and Y is why it's called A11Y. I felt like a very dumb person when I finally figured out that's why it's called A11Y. But now you know, in case you're like, this doesn't make any sense as an acronym. It's because there are 11 letters between the first and the last letter in the word. In any case, accessibility benefits everyone. So if you're thinking, if I need to make my website accessible, this is really only benefiting a very small number of users. No, you're wrong, because disability in general can be completely different from person to person. So if you are missing an arm, you are probably what most people would think of as a person that accessibility could benefit, because you would be greatly benefiting using a keyboard over a mouse, because you can easily access everything from only one hand. Similarly, if you have injured your arm in a bicycling accident, like my partner did last year, and you are temporarily unable to use your arm, accessibility benefits also come to you. Also, if you have a situational disability, like for instance, you're carrying a baby, or you have food and you have like a fork next to you that you are trying to use while you are accessing a website. This is a situational disability that prevents you from fully using the website. So accessibility and making sure that the website is accessible with a keyboard still benefits you, and it is important to have this available for everyone, not just like what you would think of as like a traditional, I guess, standard to say, no. Accessibility benefits everyone. It's fantastic. So if you like the rising tide raises all ships type of thing, like this is important to build into your website. Also, if you think of like accessibility, you can't actually gather data on like how many people are using specific types of assistive technology. So like a screen reader, for instance, there is not any analytics metrics or data about who is using a screen reader on your website. Mostly this is for medical guidelines, like we don't really want people to know about that. So this isn't information that you can like state how many people are using your website that would use assistive technology versus not. Just assume everyone can benefit from this, because that's a great idea to have. As a screen reader, just as a basic guideline of information, again, they're assistive technology. They have screen information that they convey through non-visual means. Normally this is sound, and also they're cool. This is just like screen readers are cool. I'm just gonna repeat that a lot over time. A very brief history of screen readers. This is, again, not everything. In 1936, the first electronic speech synthesizer was invented. This probably freaked a lot of people out because it's the 30s and they are not expecting that. But like Bell Labs, they're so great. 50 years later, we have the IBM screen reader for DOS, which is created at IBM primarily for low vision staff members. And then in '89, you get JAWS, which was one of the key players in the screen reader market, which is released for MS-DOS. It costs money. So in 2006, you get an open source screen reader created by Michael Curran, who gets tired of paying for JAWS, and he makes his own called NVDA, which is the other major player in the screen reader market. And then the third is, of course, VoiceOver, which is part of the Apple operating system since 2005. And since 2009, it's also on your iPhone, which is super helpful. So you have a tablet that has screen reader technology built into it. This is like incredibly helpful. So again, this is not everything involved in screen reader history, but still like enough to get the basics of understanding. So if we look at how a person who uses a screen reader might interact with your website, it is very different from how a sighted user would interact with your website. Like this guy, Tuka Oyala, who doesn't have a monitor on his desk. He just sits there with the keyboard. And this is super cool. Like just how do you, I don't know, I love it so much. So if we go to this website where this photo is from, we have this interview with this developer where he explains kind of what his process is like and how he works and how he interacts with the internet and his computer in general. And he's got a sample of this paragraph in particular as he would hear it through his screen reader. As he mentions in this paragraph, English is generally spoken at about like 120 words a minute. He hears text at 450 words a minute. So this is 3 times as fast as you would generally talk in a conversation. And I'm going to play it and it's going to sound like I'm not playing it correctly because it sounds wildly garbled. That's the point. You're hearing it correctly. It's just very, very fast. You can definitely look at this deck later and click on this link and hear it for yourself again. It's insane. So let's just, it's 24 seconds. So it's very fast to go through this entire paragraph. We're just going to listen to it for a second. Here we go. So to be fair, it is in Finnish. He's using, he's reading English with a Finnish speech synthesizer. Even if you're listening to it in English, that doesn't really help you at all. Like you think, like, oh, I'm at a disadvantage because I'm listening to a different language. Of course, I'm not going to understand anything. Let me tell you that English does not actually help.
The computer I'm using is a perfectly normal laptop running Windows 10. It's in the software where the magic happens. I use a program called the screen reader to access the computer. The screen reader intercepts what's happening on the screen and presents that information I read through a separate red display or synthesized speech, and it's not the random synthetic speech you hear in Domain's master system. I use a robotic sounding voice with speech at around 450 words per minute. For comparison, English is commonly spoken at around 100-150 words per minute. There's one additional quirk in my setup. Since I need to read both Finnish and English regularly, I'm reading English with a Finnish speech synthesizer. I give the Domain screen readers weren't smart enough to switch between languages automatically, so this was what I got used to. Give a sample of this paragraph in red and I would read it, and give the same text spoken with an English synthesizer.
So this is insane to me. Like I get that after a long period of time experiencing the internet like this, you would get used to it. Just it baffles my mind. So of course, like if you're a sighted user, you're kind of scanning the paragraph. So it makes sense that like over time, your eyes get used to just like picking out individual words and putting together the sentences that you would expect. And similarly, likely when he is listening to a speech synthesizer speaking at 450 words a minute, he's not like fully listening to everything. You're picking out individual words and like getting the overall gist of it, but this is still great and I greatly enjoy information like this. So this is how he's consuming websites at this like completely audio assault almost in my mind. But so is screen readers just for people like Tuka, where it's blind people and that's it? Well, accessibility in general, no, like we talked about, being able to access a keyboard or being able to access a website through just a keyboard is incredibly important for everyone. And also screen readers, a little bit more, but still no. There are a lot of people that use screen readers that are not just blind. For instance, these lovely user groups. So if you are blind since birth, you have no concept of visual internet. So that would be an important user group for screen readers. If you have acquired blindness, you can still kind of envision what the content would be, but screen readers are still wildly necessary for you. If you have low vision, you might still use a screen reader to decode parts of the page where you can kind of get the images that are on the page, but you can't understand a lot of the words because it's difficult for you to see. Similarly, if you have cognitive disabilities and challenges with the actual act of reading, a screen reader might be incredibly helpful for you. So for instance, my mom will not acknowledge how difficult of a time she has reading content on a page. So instead, she has resorted to using a screen reader. She will not get better glasses. That is not an option. Instead, she'll just use a screen reader and it's totally okay. It's totally fine for her. But like, still, mom, please acknowledge that you need better glasses. Still, if she had other types of challenges with the act of reading, she'd still be able to use a screen reader. There are lots of people that use screen readers that are not just blind people. Like, this is helpful for everyone. So as an example, in case you've never actually used a screen reader, we're just going to see what it looks like. So if you're, I'm just going to, because we work for Urban Outfitters, I'm just going to pick apart one of our competitors because it's a little bit mean and it's what I enjoy. So if we open, because I'm on a Mac, system preferences, and we go to accessibility in the settings, there's this little option for voiceover and you can turn it on. So you're going to hear it. It talks like nonstop. So it is very difficult to get used to, but I greatly enjoy
voiceover on system preferences, accessibility window, accessibility features table, voiceover, selected as keyboard focus. You are currently on a table. To enter this table, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow.
So it just narrates literally everything that you're doing. So when I click onto this, the Chrome window, instead it's going to announce that it's a Chrome window, and then it's going to read out the name of the title of the page. What is super helpful when I open the window, though, is I'm going to open what's called a rotor menu.
Chrome, AE skeleton hands graphic t-shirt, Google Chrome window, visited link, 0 checkout, has keyboard focus. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control, Option, Space.
So if I hit Control, Option, U, I can open
links menu.
What's called the rotor menu. This allows me to access the important parts of the page for a screen reader user. So the key areas are going to be the links, the headings, any of the content areas. There's a section called articles. There's a bunch of stuff that you can get to here. And this is like your key to getting like the important parts. Like if I'm a sighted user looking at this page, I'm going to see like the product image and the options and different stuff like that. But what if I needed to get to the menu? Like, how would I get to that? How would I get to links further down the page, the reviews section? Like, if I just want to skip a bunch of content, the rotor menu is super helpful for me getting to the important pieces that I really need. The thing that I don't like about this particular website and why I'm using it just as an example to pick apart is if I look at the links menu, there are a lot of links in here, a bunch of them. So it starts off with the links in the header, like search account, favorites, checkout. But then it goes into every single link in the menu, which if I am a sighted user and I hover over one and I see the drop down, there are a lot in there because it's a mega menu. It's giant. So every single link in every one of those drop downs is in this menu. It's annoying to get through. It's incredibly large. If I were working on this website, for instance, what I would recommend is that the nav drop downs are not actually in the HTML content on the page, but are instead loaded in as the user hovers over the menu. But I don't work with this website, so I can't tell them that. But so for instance, there's so many of these, it's gonna take me forever to scroll through them. So it's still going through, you can see like where it's trying to like, it'll highlight with a little focus ring around where the link would be. So it's showing you that it would be in the drop down.
Link.
So all of these are in drop downs. Apparently they link to a bunch of sports clothing.
Link,
they're all
tops,
in there.
link,
I think
link, link.
Go.
After Maggie Cassidy opens a she, her, has left the meeting.
Oh, okay, someone left a meeting. I'm excited that it announced all of this. So
link, shipping plus returns.
If I actually get to something that I would be interested in, like I would like to know about American Eagle shipping and returns information.
Link, shipping plus returns. You are currently on a link inside of web content. To click this link, press Control, Option, Space. To exit this web area, press Control, Option, Shift, up arrow.
So it'll give me all of this information within these little rotor menus. And then when we get down to these reviews, the information that's available for a sighted user on the page is super helpful, but the information that's available in the rotor menu is, again, not very helpful. So for instance, These links of
Chrome has new window.
Would be incredibly helpful if the link name was
Nathaniel Hedman has joined the meeting.
Hi, Than. If the review, like, if part of that information was part of the information that's available in the link rotor menu, it's not. So if I look
Links menu
in this menu, all the way at the bottom, there we go. You can see that like these links show up in this menu as literally just yes and no, and a person named Arlene, and there's a height and a weight apparently are part of these links menu. These aren't really helpful. So like the things that you're putting on your link are helpful for screen reader users because that's how they're going to figure out what they need to navigate to. If you're just literally putting the text that's in the link as the title, this is not helpful for someone who's using a menu like this. Similarly,
headings menu.
You can get to all of the headings.
Osmi Maham has joined the meeting.
Oh my God, that's so helpful that it announces all this stuff. So once you've opened the rotor menu, you can hit the left or right arrow keys just to get through all these different types of menus. So I can see on this page that I have one H1, which is helpful, and it is a product name. And then I have two H4s. I don't have any H2s. I don't have any H3s, which I guess is not very semantic. It would be great if they did that. But still, I can get to
heading level 4. Follow us.
Each of them, and then click it if I wanted to get to it.
Form controls menu.
Similarly, they have any forms that are on the page showing
share on no items in web spots menu.
No web spot.
Landmarks menu. Navigation.
And then they have 2 landmarks for navigation, but none for main content, which again would be very helpful.
Articles menu. Window spots menu. Links menu.
So these are the things that a screen reader is going to see when they look at your web page. It's helpful to understand how someone with a screen reader is accessing your content, because then you can get a better understanding of what they're going through and why they might be frustrated and leave your website if you have poor accessibility. So I greatly enjoy going through this sometimes, although it's also, if you are a sighted user, it tends to get a little bit annoying and very repetitive. I would assume it also gets very repetitive for an average, like someone who is relying on a screen reader on a daily basis. But I would assume they also start to tune things out over time, just like we all do. But again,
system preferences, accessibility, voiceover off.
And it's pretty great. So how do we get this information in the screen reader available to us? Again, labels, that's one of the key things. So screen readers should know what to call things. ARIA labels is one of the key ways to get that to happen. They are very easy to implement and they are very well supported. So this is like a no-brainer. Anybody can do this. There are kind of the 3 key ARIA label types of things that we can use that are like the most helpful. One of them is ARIA label. It accepts a text string. It's announced before a field, like an input. Labeled by accepts an ID. So if you have a heading somewhere else on the page that you would also like to use to label the field, this is very helpful to allow you to use existing elements. And then described by also accepts an ID or series of IDs for supplemental information that's going to come after the input. So let's look at an example. This, for instance, what is your total individual income? Required edit text is what you would hear from a voiceover on this section, which seems pretty great. That feels like that's what that field is doing. But that is not actually all that field has. It also has radio inputs below. They'll allow you to choose yearly, monthly, or weekly. And then completely below the form, it gives you a bunch of supplemental information about what would be included in that individual income. This is not helpful. So if you're a screen reader and you're just using, or you're just reading what is your individual income and required edit text, this is not helpful. So what would we actually do if we wanted to help screen reader users get the right information from this? So inside the label for what is your total individual income, we might want to add a span that has a screen reader only class added to it. So it is visually hidden and has CSS that hides that text, but it would still be read by a screen reader. Sorry, that's my dog. Because it's still like inside the actual HTML content for the label. what we've learned about with ARIA described by, we'd be able to add that to the input field itself and call the ID of the disclaimer that's below. So it would be read supplemental information after the input. This would be a lot more helpful for a screen reader user because they'd have a lot better picture of what's actually happening on the page and what is expected of them in this input field, instead of just put in a number and you assume they probably mean annual, but they don't. You can actually choose that. So like having this information available to the screen reader user is incredibly helpful. Similar, if you're building a checkbox and you're doing that with just not actually a checkbox input field, you're just building like borders and like cool fancy images instead of an actual like checkbox thing that would be like the standard output, but you don't like that and your designer has told you that it doesn't look right, so instead you have to build something separate. A screen reader can't actually see that it's a checkbox. So you built something that is for sighted users only, and someone who is using a screen reader has no idea that they would need to actually click a checkbox because you haven't given them the right data for what you're trying to get them to do. So that's most of my talk. I feel like I went through a lot and I probably talked nonstop and very fast, similar to 450 words a minute. At least that's what it feels like. Also, again, a lot of information and screen readers are great. Are there questions? Did I miss anything?
So how do you go about testing that your website is accessible?
Oh, that's a great question. A lot of times what I'll do is use the voiceover, like I'll turn voiceover on the website that I'm using just to see what's available to me. There's also a bunch of like third-party companies that you can partner with that have like, that's literally all they do is they like test websites for that type of stuff. Occasionally I'll see websites that have that like little tab that shows out of the side that like has the like accessibility icon on it. I would not implement something like that because it feels like it's not actually implementing it as a solution. It's like kind of slapping a sticker over top of it. It like that. It's not, you're not thinking about it from the beginning. You're not implementing the actual steps that are needed to take to like do the work, which is key. You're just like adding on a weird layer over top of it that's not getting to the actual problem. But like using voiceover is super helpful. At my job, we do this thing called like empathy hour, where like once a month or so, we will go through like as a team and use our own websites or like try and go through our day, at least an hour in the day as a different type of user. So like we'll get a bunch of colorblind glasses. So everyone has to use a website or like complete their day using these colorblind glasses or using a screen reader turned on the entire time. Like have a better understanding of how a person with a screen reader would be using your website and like what they're going through and why that might be difficult with things that you're not implementing correctly. And that's like super helpful. Oh my God, that was fantastic. There was one that was like, we did, I think the worst day was we throttled everything to like a super slow connection.
Oh,
Just, oh, it's painful. It's like, this is not, like you forget how slow everything is. And like, it's just, oh, it was so hard. But like, you know, if you're in a rural area or like a country that does not have a lot of Wi-Fi or good internet connections or a very, very old cell phone or a low model of cell phone, like that's what you have available to you. So it's important to know like how people are accessing your website and what they might be facing. So like that really cool animation that you're trying to add that it takes up a lot of bandwidth might not be the best idea. But like, yeah, that definitely like the empathy hour thing was super cool.
I think that, as Kristin mentioned earlier, right, some of this dovetails very nicely with semantic principles and, right, I guess hopefully you don't let it get to the point where you're testing after the fact, right? Like with making it accessible for mobile users or low bandwidth users, right? You want a accessible first approach in terms of how you design the site and pages to begin with. And obviously that's not always possible, but I don't think that that's an impossible concept to start with, and especially when you're implementing something new.
Yeah, I had a previous job. I was at an agency, and one of the clients that we had come to us with a website that they had built from a different company. And they were like, can you just like, we have really bad like rankings. Can you like see if there's anything wrong with our code and like go through? And we did this audit, and like their homepage, they had this quote from one of their clients on it, and it was in this block. And behind the quote, they had these like large quotation marks that was like showing like, this is a quote from someone. But apparently the previous developer had decided these quotation marks should be very large, which means I should make them H1s. No, oh dear God, this was awful. Like it was kind of very painful to look at, because you're like, this is not great. Like the H1s on your homepage should not be literal quotation marks and nothing else. And like the actual quote itself wasn't an H1. It was literally just these giant quotation marks that showed up as completely decorative text. It was, oh God, it was like, I had to tell them like, I'm sorry, I had to fix all these things or whatever. And like, they did not understand how like bad of an issue this was. But like, also if you're a screen reader user and you're trying to look at the homepage, like the headings on the page should not just be like quotation mark, like this doesn't make any sense. You're like, definitely like accessibility and semantics go hand in hand. This isn't just semantics just because you're trying to show that you're good at websites and you know how to make things and you can count or whatever, or make like a structure of headings, but also like you need to have the information presented in a way that makes sense to both your screen reader users as well as website crawlers. Like if you're a spider and you're crawling that website and you're trying to figure out what's the most important thing on the page, quotation marks is not the most important thing on your homepage. That's like a wildly bad idea from every avenue. Like everything is telling you, please don't do this. So like, yeah, there are many reasons and they all kind of work together. So if you're trying to do the best for accessibility, you're actually trying to do the best for a bunch of different things for your website, and it will benefit everything. I see a hand up.
Yeah, I had a question in regards to different technologies that you've utilized to audit. So for example, I've utilized Wave and I've utilized Lighthouse through Chrome, but I was wondering about specifically, I've seen ESLint, there's like special ESLint rules for certain accessibility, as well as I think it's Axe that is available through Chrome DevTools extension as well. And any other technologies that you've utilized just to either check for color blindness, check for accessible font, additional things that aren't necessarily screen reader covered, I guess is what I'm asking. And if this is out of the scope of this conversation, that's fine as well.
No, that's a great question. There's actually like, I'm glad you brought that up because there's like a bunch of stuff that you can do. So like, I do like using this little accessibility tab, which tells you like what is available in the accessibility tree on this page. There's also a bunch of stuff. So like if you click on, for instance, I am looking at, what is this? The name of the product color. So like this t-shirt is black. And if I click on this color, you can actually see this neat little thing in here that tells you that the contrast ratio for this label is not good. So it gives you this little drop down that says, if you're trying to meet accessibility standards for the AA level, there are different levels. AA is generally like minimum good, and then AAA is like, you are the most accessible website ever, which is fantastic. So like the minimum for this type of text would be a 4.5, and this contrast ratio does not meet that, which is not good. So if you're like a person with, again, like my mom, not great visibility, and you're trying to read the name of this color, you probably can't, which is important. Like it's the name of the color. You should know what that is. And like, you can't read it. I was actually looking at the company a friend works for, their website, I think it was like yesterday. And like the button that said like, contact us now, was this like pretty, but not helpful at all, like neon teal color. And it was so light, and it was on top of a white background. And I'm like, I can't even read this. And I have glasses, I have good vision. There's like no reason that you should have done this. What is, like, it made me a little bit angry because they're a website, like they're a company that makes websites, and I'm like, you should know better. This is your job. Like, make a button that's accessible. What's wrong with you? Like, but it's here, you know, in Chrome. Like, Chrome is going to help you by giving you this information about whether or not it's accessible. There's also a bunch of websites that you can like put in the color information, and it'll tell you whether or not it's like kind of good enough. But yeah, definitely the accessibility tab is super helpful because it'll tell you also if there are any ARIA attributes on it, and then how it fits in the overall tree, which I greatly enjoy. But also this like, do you pass the contrast ratio is super helpful.
Cool, thank you. I've actually never used that tab. Sweet, thanks.
There's another one.
Tell me.
Hi, I have a quick question, kind of, and y'all started to address this with like the accessibility first comment. But I feel like in tech, it is very easy for people to just take on the perspective of like, just ship it and go, like, we'll fix it later, we'll figure it out later, just push what we have. And so I'm very curious how you all like build an accessibility first approach into your like product and dev team workflow, at least like if you can expand on that a little bit within your company.
I mean, I think that the first thing is that people have to be, I guess, you know, it's tough to always put this on to people, the individual, but you have to, someone has to be willing to stand up and say that, right, it's not acceptable to ship without that thing, that it's like shipping with a massive security flaw, or, you know, treating it as a first class concern. And by you putting it forth as a first class concern, right, you're hopefully going to steer the organization a little bit. But I also think that if you're working for a large client, that the stick side of things, which is mentioning that the ADA is a real thing, and that it is extremely, so websites at a sufficient scale or audience are considered to be a public accommodation under the ADA. And so that's the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm actually married to an attorney who used to litigate on these issues. So it's really important. Pizza Hut or Domino's recently paid out a massive settlement because they had built a web app with a special discount for using the web app that wasn't accessible. And so if you're working with someone who's not responding to the leadership first approach, I think that there's a real obvious business case on the stick side, which is don't get us sued, but also on the carrot side, which is that, as Kristin pointed out throughout, you generally do not know how many of your users use or would benefit from good accessibility practices, and to foreclose on a subset of your market because, you know, you're not willing to fully engage, I don't know, something that's already just best practices. Obviously that's not a great business case, no matter how much you want to get it out the door.
Yeah, even with like something as simple as like error messages, if you have a red-green color blindness, like those might be difficult for you to understand what's different between them. So if you like, it's helpful if you like, generally with something like red-green color blindness, it's ubiquitous enough that generally you have someone in management that is dealing with it, and therefore can feel like it's important enough that we should deal with it as a whole. So like there's someone that's going to help you get on board and champion your cause. But generally it's in every organization that I've worked in, there's always at least one person that is knowledgeable in accessibility and is the person that pipes up and says like, hey, we need to care about this. And that's like, it's just that one or two people that are like reminding everyone else that it is a concern that we need to have. And also like it starts to eventually kind of ripple out into other people. So on my team, I am not the person that is most concerned about accessibility. There's someone else, and they like, anytime we put out a new feature, like we revamped the cart page and how you enter in a promo code. And like, that's pretty important. There are a bunch of things that you can do with accessibility for the promo code input field. And the person that champions accessibility on my team was like, let's do this and make sure that we have all these labels and adding in all this information. And like, the more that you see how easy it is to implement and like kind of how satisfying it is to work through and like adding in all these pieces and making sure that it's not awful to use your website with a voiceover functionality, is like, the more other people start to care about it as well. And it becomes more commonplace and like part of the routine where like, all right, we're building a new feature, let's think about accessibility. And then it's not just like one person needing to bring it up and like feeling like a drag all the time, but instead other people also start to like bring up that idea as well. So it's like, you probably start to feel at the beginning like, you know, the squeaky wheel, like, why do I keep talking about this if no one else is caring? But they eventually do after a while, where they're like, oh, this isn't that hard. And like, it makes sense. A lot of it is like pretty like intuitive to think about, like you're adding labels to things. Of course it's helpful. Like, it's not that difficult. You're just like kind of adding in all these pieces of things that are helpful. Like you can add in ARIA expanded for an accordion to say whether or not it's collapsed or expanded. Like, it's pretty simple. This is easy to understand. This is not something that's like difficult or hard to wrap your head around. Like, you just have to like remember to think about it. And the more you like bring it up at the beginning of the conversation, and even in PR review, if you're like, hey, this doesn't have an ARIA label, or like, hey, you're missing a role on this, or like that type of stuff, like just kind of reminding other people about this process, then they'll start to bring it up too.
Becca asked, any recommendations or resources for accessible first design? I'm going to drop a link, which is where I first read about it as a concept. Obviously, I'd heard about like mobile first or like resource constrained first before, but this is a 2017 article outlining the principles and more broadly the concept, which is that's you know, like the reorientation towards accessibility first design. Do you have any other? Kristin, do you have any other? I guess yes. Well, so I guess this is a great place to start. I can't think of any other ones, but this is what I originally read.
There's like, so a thing that I greatly enjoy doing to make sure that I am up to date on our industry is I sign up for like every email newsletter that I can. So like the CSS Tricks website has an email newsletter, and the Stack Overflow has an email newsletter. There's like a bunch of different ones. And it's super helpful because a lot of times I feel like, especially as a woman, I get imposter syndrome when I go to conferences, especially if it's a JavaScript conference, and I feel out of my depth, especially because they talk about like every new piece of technology that comes out every 5 minutes. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe I shouldn't be here. But if you sign up for these email newsletters, they like talk about what's happening. And so you like start to feel like you're up to date on trends, and it's super helpful. But there's one person that gets like, I'd say especially with CSS Tricks, because they're more like front-end development focused, which is super helpful. Stack Overflow tends to be like a little bit more across the board in terms of, they'll talk about backend development. They'll talk about the Stack Overflow for non-coding, like the space website or the math website or whatever. But like CSS Tricks is a little bit more like my area. Like I enjoy front end. But like occasionally they'll have links about accessibility or adding accessibility into specific things. And one person in particular that they keep mentioning is this woman, Sarah Sueden. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name right. I'm probably not. But like she comes up often. And so I feel like she's probably going to be a good resource. There she is. Yeah, she does a bunch of stuff about accessibility. She showed up recently in one of the CSS Tricks newsletters, and I feel like it was pretty cool. So I'm going to try and find it at some point and figure out how I can share it to everyone after this ends. Ooh, I wonder if she like talks about it in her article. Probably not. This doesn't seem relevant. But yeah. This like article that Van linked to seems helpful. Nope, I'm still here. There we go. Yeah. I think, who else? Oh, Pamocratic asked, do you track or can we track number of accessibility users as they hit your site? No, you can't. Like HIPAA, we don't really track anything because it's kind of related to like your medical needs. People don't really want to share that information at all. So there is absolutely zero information about how many people with assistive devices are using your website. It is not available. It's not in anything from Google Analytics. You'd think like Google tries to track literally everything about you. And this is the one piece that they refuse to touch, which is great. Like I really enjoy that there's this one area that they won't actually be able to get to, aside from like literally everything else about me. But this is the one thing that you cannot find out. So like, it's difficult because well, it's kind of helpful. I like that they don't track it because it means that there's no way for someone in your organization to say no one with assistive devices uses our website, because they don't have proof of that. There's no information that they can give you that says this isn't happening. So it's kind of helpful for you to just assume that everyone uses assistive devices, or at least, especially with the case that Fan mentioned, like, you have to assume that enough people with assistive devices are using your website or app that making it difficult for them would make it eventually a legal problem for you. With the case of, I think it was, I don't remember if it was Domino's or Pizza Hut, but like, I remember they were sued for it, and it was in the news, and it was very frustrating to see that it was available in the news. But what was entertaining is when this process was going on, the company actually fought back. They were like, no, we shouldn't have to make this accessible as a website or as an app for people using assistive devices. And it was like really frustrating to see. Like, it is just so much easier for you to fix this problem and like care about your customers. Like, why is this something that you're even trying to fight back on? And then they still lost, which made me very, very happy, because like, good, it's pizza. Just let people buy your pizza. Like, why is this a problem? I don't understand. But it was very satisfying to see that they lost, and it made me super happy. But yeah, it's a thing that can eventually happen to any website of a certain size, especially like if you're not meeting the AA or AAA like standards. So like AA is kind of the minimum that's required. So like, looking at your website and making sure that it meets those standards is key. There's like a bunch of NPM packages that you can run to see like if you are passing things that like kind of go through. I think one of them is actually called A11Y, and they'll like kind of rate you and give you an audit locally if you're running like in your local environment. So it's like super helpful. But the Axe browser extension, as well as like in Chrome, their tools, seeing what's available. Oh, that actually gives you a bunch of other stuff. Look at all this. This is super cool. What a great website, Dan. But he left. But yeah. I think I rambled a bit. Are there any other questions? Oh my God, I'm sorry.
Oh no, that was great. So are there certain layouts you would say that it's harder to make accessible? Like if you're going accessible first, are there layouts that should be avoided?
If you like, it's difficult because like, I feel like a lot of designers get bored. And so like, they just want to make something that looks really cool and like has like all this new stuff and like looks fancy or whatever. And like, it's frustrating, I get it, but like the things that are predictable in a website are what make it accessible. So if you have something that you want to make really flashy and there's no actual visible text at all until you hover on something, like, I guess that's cool, is a really cool concept, but if you don't care about your users at all, that's really the only reason that you would want to make it. So like, asking a lot of questions about like, is there important information that's only available on hover? That's pretty key, because like if I'm using a keyboard to access the website, I'm not going to get to any hover text. It's just not going to happen. So if something is available on focus or hover, that would be helpful. But if it's only available on hover and it's like super important information, you've just taken it away from me, because I'm never going to get to it. Similar to like think about how someone's going to use the website. I think is the most important. It's like figuring out whether or not a website is going to be good for accessibility. Like if you're like refining a ticket and you like think about what is the level of effort involved in that ticket, and you like try and ask yourself all the questions about like how would you work through the ticket and what is the risk involved and everything, it's kind of the same questions that you go through then when looking at a design, and like how accessible is this going to be, like how am I actually going to use it, like how would I get to all these pieces of information if I'm like using a keyboard? Can I get to everything? If I can't, then no, let's maybe find something different. And sometimes it's really hard. Like I've seen a lot of people try and put in a lot of information on a tooltip that's only available on Hover. And like, do you also hate your mobile users? Like, where is it going on a phone? Because you can't get to it on a phone either. Like, there are like a lot of concerns that are coming along if you can't get to anything from a keyboard. I feel like having someone break an arm, which is not like, I don't want anyone to break their arm, but like if you have it happen to you, then you start to think about these questions a lot more because you're like, I can't use my mouse. So like you're forced to think about these things and it helps bring it to the front of your mind. Or if you have a partner that breaks their arm and then you're forced to think about how they use their websites all the time. And you're like, this is gonna suck if I want him to actually look at this. Like I can't, you know, because he's only got one arm, you know? Or if you're like, we had at a previous job, I worked at an agency and we had a client that sold gear for like babies, like strollers and like a bunch of like mats or something and like car seats or whatever. And it was very helpful because they knew like if they're dealing with like their primary demographic is going to be like likely moms, like this might not be their first child and so they're looking for like kind of upgrading their baby gear, or moms buying for someone else, like they're going to show up to a baby shower or whatever, but they kind of had it in their head ahead of time. They knew like these women are doing other things at the same time that they're using our website. So they're likely holding a child or wrangling a toddler or pushing a stroller at the same time that they are using their phone or they are trying to deal with their computer. So that idea ahead of time of like, they need to be able to do things as quickly as possible and as easily as possible. Like, don't make it hard for your users. Like, let them buy things on your website or let them access your content. That's like, why would you make it difficult for your users? They're the people that you like. That's like why they're there. You've made this website for these people, like not for yourself. Like, don't make it hard for them. So like getting that idea of like, who are your user groups? How are they using the website? Like, that's kind of helpful ahead of time. So if you're just building a website to look pretty, then like you can make it as inaccessible as you want because like no one's going to use it. It doesn't matter. But if you actually would like to have people use your website, then you should think about it during the design.
Awesome. Thank you.
I also have a question in regards to, are there certain frameworks that are considered more accessible or not? So if you compare React to Vue per se.
Oh, React to Vue doesn't really make a difference. The key thing that's helpful about accessibility is like, if you think about a website crawler, like a lot of times they're looking at the HTML, like the source code. So like that visual parts of the page aren't important to them. And the rendered parts of the page aren't important to them. They're looking at, you know, the source code. Not so much anymore. Now they more look at rendered pages. But like accessibility, because they are looking at the rendered page, that doesn't really matter as much. So like if something is in a very large JSON block and gets like rendered in a completely different way that is like actually visual, like let's look at this American Eagle website. Oh, actually I still have it open. I wonder if they have it. I bet you they do. Yeah. Oh no, they do. So like similar to, actually we're gonna show one of my own websites here. So again, I work for Urban, so this is one of the websites that I work on. So if I am, for instance, trying to get to skip links, helpful, like the navigation dropdown. If I am looking at the source code right now, this website is built in Vue. So if I am looking at the source code right now, the code for the dropdown is not available in the page. So if I open a screen reader and look at the link section, it's not going to list every link in the dropdown, which is great. Good job, my company. We did the right thing. But if I want to get to all of these links, hold on, let me actually like click on something. This would be like pretty easy to do. So like, even though these links are not available before I hover on the dropdown or before I hover over the nav and show the dropdown, they are available and I can still tab through them as soon as the dropdown is available to me. We actually built something called a focus trap, which is helpful. So like once I am like in this section, I can like kind of tab through like further things. Like I'm within the navigation for a while. Like I'm not going to accidentally leave and jump further down the page because I am like kind of trapped in this area, because it would be easier for a user, and this is like what their intent is. So like now that I'm off of the drop down and I'm tabbing through, like I can no longer tab to those things because I don't want to get to them. It doesn't make sense anymore for me to then tab all the way through all of the drop down items. But like this is kind of helpful because if we're looking at like what framework is best, it doesn't really matter. What really matters is how easily you can add the individual pieces that you want onto like links or headings to make them available for screen readers or keyboard users, and whether or not like the visual content is matching what's announced in screen readers. So like you shouldn't really have a significantly different experience for a keyboard user versus a sighted user versus a screen reader user. Like they should all kind of have the same interactions on your website, because that's the goal. It's like they should all be able to do the same things. So I can, if I'm accessing the nav with my keyboard or with a screen reader or with my mouse, I can do all the same things, and that's what matters.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing.